Hey, how's it going? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be filming my January wrap-up. Can you believe it? We're already done with the first month of 2022. I feel like January just went by so freaking fast. But anyways, in the month of January, I'm so excited to let you know that I read 19 books this month. We're starting off 2022 with a freaking bang. And 19 books is pretty high. It's up there as one of like my highest read months ever. And I'm excited to let you know that out of the 19 books that I read this month, I had 4 5-star reads, I had 4 4-star books, I had 8 3-star books, and then 1 2-star and 1 1-star. Yep, we already had a 1-star book this year. And so even though the reading is mostly like kind of coming into the middle there with like a 3-star being the average, at least I had 4 5-stars this month, you know? I think that's pretty cool. I found some new faves. And then as far as genres go, I read 5 horror books this month thanks to Winterween, and I read 6 thrillers, I read 2 young adult books, 5 nonfiction books, and 1 sci-fi romance. Yeah, I guess I was really into nonfiction this month. Maybe it's just me entering my nonfiction era. I don't know what this is, but I really enjoyed reading some nonfiction this month. I also just wanted to check in on my goals because I did end up reading a book of the month selection for this month, and I read a book of the month selection that was from last year, so tick off those boxes. I also did complete the Buzzwordathon word for this month, and on Patreon I did do 3 different reading sprints over on Patreon this month. I did 2 with Olivia during Winterween, and then I did 1 in late January, and then I also did host 2 different movie nights on my Patreon because I just had so much fun doing the first one that I immediately scheduled a second one, and we watched Lady Bird for the first one and we watched Booksmart for the second movie night, and then we have plans to watch No Exit, the movie adaptation that's coming out on Hulu next month, February. So if you'd like to join us for February, my Patreon link is down below. And I just had so much fun with the movie nights, like oh my god, what a great time. And then I also did utilize my library a lot more than I normally do because about half of these books ended up being checked out from my library, so I don't currently have them in possession with me right now, which is gonna make things harder for my editing self, but it's like better for my community and for the world, you know? I also did want to mention too that I had 2 DNFs this month. I got about 100 pages into both of these, and I'm so sorry, but I just don't care. I just can't do it anymore. Bloodline is a thriller that I've heard some really great things about, but for me personally, I guess the plot was pretty early on, and I'm just really not interested in this writing style. I didn't realize it was going to be so historical and taking place in the 60s when I read this, so I was not a fan, you know? I just didn't care. And then Second First Impressions is a romance that I've been pretty excited about for a while, especially since I love The Hating Game by this author, but unfortunately, this book, I got 100 pages in and I was just bored to tears. So, I think I'm gonna DNF this one for now. And then the first book that I kicked off the year 2022 with was Reckless Girls by Rachel Hawkins. I actually did an entire reading vlog just for this book. That was a Patreon only reading vlog. So if you're curious about that, once again, I'm sorry, I gotta plug it, you know, I gotta do it. But yeah, so exclusive reading vlog for this is on my Patreon if you'd like to know even more of my thoughts. But I thought that this, I don't know, this was a pretty fun book, okay? This isn't some like literary masterpiece or anything, but this is like a fun thriller, you know, it's Major Island vibes. We're following this main girl named Lux, which like that is the coolest name ever. I love the name Lux. They live in Hawaii and they're taking these 2 girls that are tourists out on their boat, and they're gonna go to this island that's kind of like this unknown kind of island where some people like to go, but it's very deserted and isolated. And then while they're there, all kinds of shenanigans ensues, and I love thrillers like this where it's like island vibes, but it's also very isolated, and it's also like rich people murder vibes because these 2 tourist girls are paying them a great deal of money to do this for them, and it's just, I don't know, it's so entertaining. It's like not the best thriller that I've ever read, and it definitely falls apart at the end. Like it gets so ridiculous at the end and kind of over the top, but I don't know, I had fun with it. I gave it 3 stars. I still prefer The Wife Upstairs over this one, but like this one was fun, you know, for what it was a good time. And then the second book that I read this month was during Winterween, which if you didn't know what Winterween is, it's a readathon that's hosted by myself and my friend Olivia, and this year for Winterween I was able to read a whole bunch. The first book that I started with was Moon of the Crusted Snow, which yes, if you guessed it, I checked this out from my library, the book and the audiobook. And I actually did daily vlog the entirety of Winterween, so I don't want to go too deep into my thoughts on these books because I've talked about them so much already. But Moon of the Crusted Snow was this really great kind of horror, post-apocalyptic story where we're following these people who live on a reservation who, you know, they lose power and then they like lose their connection to the outside world, and they don't know if it's just their community that's experiencing this or if it's like the entire world. And it's very much a slow burning kind of, you know, creepy story that's very unsettling about these people starting to realize they might be facing more than just their community dealing with this, and it might be something that's going on in the world. And this is a very slow burn horror novel. I will let you know that this feels like more literary horror. Like the horror in this book doesn't really happen until like the last 30% of the book or so, but when it does, oh my god, it's just so eerie and so unsettling, and I just had a really great time reading this one. I ended up giving it 4 stars. And then the next book that I read for Winterween was The Shuddering by Anaya Alborn. This is the second book that I read from this author and the second book that I've enjoyed from this freaking horror queen. Anaya Alborn is fucking incredible, and this book this book is like a monster horror novel, and usually I like my monster horror novels to be a little bit more like ambiguous and mysterious, but this was just straight up like a monster's gonna come out there and fucking kill you in the snow. This book, honestly, it reads like a horror film because we're following this group of friends as they're going up to their cabin to stay for a bit. And then in between chapters of like seeing these friends going up to the mountain, we get these like gruesome scenes of like these random people, like we're just following these random people that are like going out in the snow, and then these monsters will come out and like brutally fucking kill them. It's like a horror movie the way it kind of goes back and forth between the two scenes. And I loved this group of friends. I mean, their characters, they did take a minute to grow on me, you know. In the beginning I was like, I don't know how I feel about this, but then oh my god, the second half of this book is just so freaking good. It's so intense. My heart was fucking racing. I was surprised by how much I cared about these characters by the end of this book. Like I was just so on edge the entire time I was reading this, and it was just so well done. It's one of my favorite monster horror books that I've ever read because I was genuinely so scared, so creeped out, and I just had to know what was gonna happen to these people. Like I read this so freaking quick. Easy 5 stars. I loved it so much. Like first 5-star of the year, what a banger. And then the next book that I read was Dark Roads by Chevy Stevens. This one was a thriller book that honestly, it was so forgettable that I forgot that I had even read this by the end of Winterween. Like in my little Winterween wrap up, I literally forgot to even mention that I read this book this week because I already spaced on it. But yeah, this one's a thriller. I think this book is kind of strange because it kind of reads like young adult, even though it isn't, because one of the characters is like 17, 18-ish for like a lot of this book, so it definitely reads like young adult. And also, I didn't realize that this book is kind of based on a real true story. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. It was very forgettable for me. The next book that I read for Winterween was The Girl in 6E by A.R. Torre. While I found this book to be very interesting, there was just something about it that I just couldn't get on board with. Like, I don't know, but this book, we're following this woman who's a cam girl, and she keeps herself like locked up in her apartment because she has this urge to kill people, and so to prevent herself from doing that, she keeps herself like isolated from the rest of the world. She makes all of her money by being a cam girl, and she never leaves her apartment basically, like ever. But I don't know, there was just something about this book. Like, I feel like if this book was more of a thriller and less of a romance, I would have enjoyed it more, but I personally found this book to be a little heavy on the romance, and I just did not give 2 fucks about the romance that was going on in this book. But just as a thriller, you know, I thought it was interesting, I thought it was fine, but I do think it takes a long time for this book to get interesting, at least for me personally. Like, the character herself is definitely interesting, but there's not a lot that happens in this book until almost like the halfway point. Like, in the beginning, you're just reading a lot about her like cam girl experiences and stuff like that, and I don't know. I thought this book was fine. I know a lot of my friends really love this one, so I'm kind of sad that I didn't love it as much as they passionately love this book. It just wasn't my personal thing. I ended up giving this one a 3 out of 5 stars. And then for Winterween, I also read Where They Wait by Scott Carson, and this is a book that I have such mixed feelings about, and I have so many feelings about this book. And this book, I think the concept is absolutely fantastic and fascinating because we're following this guy who's a journalist, and then he's kind of figuring out about this app that's supposed to help us shape our dreams. And oh my god, I love anything in horror like this where we kind of talk about dreams and like psychology and like what goes on in our brains and our subconscious, and like, oh my god, the conversations in this book were absolutely fascinating. Some of this did read more like sci-fi to me than horror. It kind of reminded me of Recursion by Blake Crouch because of the talk about memories and dreams and how those things like make us who we are. And so I loved so much about this book. I just loved the concept so much. There were some genuinely creepy moments moments in this book that I freaking loved, ate that shit up. But unfortunately, I feel like the ending of this book got so ridiculous and over the top that I was just like, I can't recommend this one now because the ending just sucked so much in my opinion. And it wasn't just like one of those endings that was like disappointing. It was an ending that it almost felt like unfinished. Like the author just like gave up on writing the story or something. Like, I don't know, it was just very unsatisfying, like very unsatisfying. So that's kind of a bummer. And because of that, I ended up giving this one 3 stars because I do think there's still so much that I love about this book, but it's also just like, it ends up being such a disappointment, which is sad. And then the last book that I read for Winterween was The Grin in the Dark. I actually thought this was called Spine Shivers, but Spine Shivers is the name of the series apparently. And this one is a middle grade horror book, which I honestly didn't realize when I first originally jumped into this book. But it's about this kid who's like babysitting his 2 twin cousins during this like stormy night, and he thinks like his aunt has this clown obsession, and so she has all these clown dolls like literally all over the house, but the kids are starting to get scared of the clown dolls and they're saying that they can like see this clown figure like walking around at night or some shit. So she puts away all of her clown dolls and shit, but then when this kid is babysitting them, he starts to see this clown doll that's in the room, and it's very creepy, okay? It's very disturbing. If you're afraid of clowns like I am, like shit, no. There are so many moments in this book where I was like, okay, no, absolutely not, like no. But otherwise, I don't know, middle grade horror just isn't really my favorite, and it's like, I know it's not fair to this book because I am not the target audience for this. Like, I feel like I would have loved this as a kid. It's very like Goosebumps kind of vibes in this one, so I do think if you enjoy Goosebumps or if you enjoy middle grade, I do think you would enjoy this. But for me, it ended up feeling super cheesy, and while the beginning did have some really great creepy moments, the ending was just very cheesy and very cliche, so I ended up giving this one 2 stars. Ooh. Right, and then the next 4 books that I read ended up being from my Reading Like a Capricorn video that I did. That was just such fun. It was so much fun to read like a Capricorn for a week. That reading vlog will be down below if you missed it, but it was a really fun time. And the first book that I read for that was You Have a Match by Emma Lord, and this one is a young adult contemporary novel, and this one is the one that had the least amount of impact on me, to be honest. It's so fuzzy in my memory, even though I just read this like 3 weeks ago or so. But this story basically follows these 2 sisters. Our main protagonist signs up for this like DNA service, and she finds out that she has this sister that she never knew that she had, and she doesn't know exactly why that they were separated when they were kids, and so she goes to this summer camp to meet her sister, and her sister is this like Instagram influencer or like a YouTuber, some kind of influencer like that. And this book was fine, you know. I just feel like some young adult books hit for me and some miss, and this was definitely more of a miss. It just felt very young to me when I was reading this. I ended up giving it 3 stars. It was fine. And the second book I read for that video was Wild, which was just a life-changing experience. This book is a nonfiction book that's written by this woman named Cheryl, and this is about her experiences when she went to go hike the Pacific Crest Trail. And this book was just a really challenging read, you know, because at the start of this, she was talking about how she was having some drug-related issues, and then her mom also had recently passed away, and she was just going through a really hard time. So she decided to take it upon herself to go and hike the Pacific Crest Trail by herself, and this was back in like 1995. She wrote this book about her journey and about what she experienced while she was out there, and there was just something about this book that was so inspiring to me. Like, I don't even know what it is, I don't know how to explain it, but this book literally made me want to go out there and like start taking hikes and like appreciating nature more. Made me realize how much I've been taking for granted living in such a beautiful place, you know, because the Pacific Crest Trail, it goes from California all the way up to Washington. So I'm originally from California, and now I'm currently living in Washington. So it was a lot of, you know, just inspiring me to be like, yo, I'm like living in a very beautiful area and I need to be taking advantage of nature more. And it just really made me want to get out there, and it was just a really beautiful story. Like, the ending just gave me goosebumps all over my body. I immediately watched the movie afterwards. It was just a life-changing experience. It was a 5-star book, one of my favorites of the year, and probably one of those books that have impacted me the most in my life. So that was great. The next book that I read for that video of Reading Capricorn book recs is One of the Good Ones, and this is one that I'm honestly surprised that I haven't heard of before, because this book is this really gut-wrenching, beautiful story that's about these sisters, and the book is also written by sisters, which, like, how cool is that? But it's this really heartbreaking story that's about this young girl who's a YouTuber, and she gets killed when she's at this protest, and we're following her sister as she's kind of dealing with the aftermath of that. This book, it honestly reminded me of a combination of like The Hate You Give meets Monday's Not Coming. It definitely reminded me a lot of Monday's Not Coming, because this book kind of turns into more of a thriller feel towards the end of this book, which is it's a change in the like tone of the book for sure about halfway through it, which it didn't feel too abrupt of a change to me, but it did feel like it was just a different tone by the end of the book, you know, because this book starts off with this like really contemporary feel, like we're just following this young girl as she's kind of grieving her sister that died in this awful way. But then towards the end of the book, it starts to feel like more of a thriller as like certain things are starting to happen. So it definitely reminded me a lot of Monday's Not Coming. But I just thought that this was such a beautiful story. It was so freaking powerful, and I do think that this is something that should be like required reading, kind of like The Hate You Give, you know, because it's very eye-opening. And even like the title of this book being one of the good ones, I wasn't sure what that meant when I started this book, and I love the conversation in this about how somebody shouldn't have to be one of the good ones in order to deserve our respect. I also loved the author's note at the end of this book. I also thought that that was very important and very educational. And yeah, I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. And then I read the book Educated, which was the final book that I read for the Capricorn video, and this is another nonfiction book that is so popular that I hadn't yet read. And in this book, we're following this woman's story about how she grew up in this very toxic, like extreme family, and was able to eventually educate herself and be able to like go on to do school and college on her own. This book was really inspiring, but I will tell you, it was also very like hard to read at times, because like we do spend a lot, like a majority of this book is talking about her childhood and how she was raised. And you know, her dad is like one of those people who he doesn't believe in doctors, he doesn't believe in science, he, you know, he's one of those like survivalist types that's like always prepared for the end of the world, but he's also just very kind of like toxic and manipulative to his own family. And because of that, it made her experience growing up very challenging, obviously, because she was never able to see a real doctor. Like all kinds of shit was happening to her as a kid, and it's not an easy read. You know, there's a lot of physical, kind of emotional abuse going on in this book, and it was a tough read, and it wasn't my favorite reading experience, but I do appreciate this book for what it is, and I do think the message is so important about how important education can be for a person. And I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. And then the next book that I read this month was Somebody's Daughter by Ashley C. Ford. This one was a book of the month selection from December, so got it checked off. I actually ended up listening to this one on audio as well, and this one is another memoir. It's another nonfiction, and this one is about this woman who, you know, her dad has been absent for her entire childhood, and she's always known that he's been in prison, but she's never known why. And it's kind of about her confronting these things that she finds out that she like never knew about her dad, and kind of dealing with that and trying to figure out how to move forward. And this book was so powerful. It was very heavy, but it's also like a really beautiful look at, you know, how your life can be affected by a parent who's in prison or a parent who's away for like most of your life. There was also a lot of really great conversation in this book about how she had this kind of awkward relationship with her mother as well, and there was a lot of discussion about that. And just the book being called Somebody's Daughter is very fitting, because it's a lot about, you know, feeling abandonment from your parent, and also dealing with things like you never thought they could do that as your parent, and now you have to live with that. It was just very tough, very hard, but it's such a beautiful book, and I ended up giving this one 5 stars. Like, I freaking loved it. One of the best nonfiction books that I've read. And then the next book that I read was Where They Found Her by Kimberly McCrate. This was our booktube pick for the month of January, so I do have a full live show discussion with Savannah down below. You can go and check it out if you missed it, but this one, unfortunately, it was not a 5-star book, so I did not complete that goal for myself this month. But this one, it ended up being just okay for me. I feel like the reasons why this book didn't work for me the way that I wanted it to was, one, because there were way too many fucking characters in this book. Like, holy shit. Like, I should never have to be expected to memorize over like 20 different character names for a story like this. Like, no way. And then I also think this book was just too cluttered because of all of the characters. There was also way too many points of view. I just think this book would have been a much more enjoyable story if she had cut down on the number of point of views and just kept it a little bit more simple. But this book is very I'm sure triggering for some because there's a lot of very heavy subjects covered in this book that were not easy to read. I mean, the main thing of this story, like the main thing that happens right at the start, is that we're following this woman named Molly, who's a reporter, and she stumbles on this case where there's a dead baby involved. And so that's kind of where this book kicks off, and we're trying to figure out what happened to this baby. Like, that's kind of like the main mystery that's going on in this book. So again, very hard-hitting stuff. I didn't realize when I chose this for a book club pick that it would be quite as hard-hitting as it was. But yeah, unfortunately, this one ended up being just fine for me. I ended up giving it 3 stars. And the next book that I read was Seek You, and this one was another nonfiction book, but this one was actually really cool because it's a nonfiction, but it's also a graphic novel, which is something that I've never read before. Like, I've never read anything like that before. This was another one that I checked out from my library, so I don't have it with me anymore, but this one was so fascinating. The main topic that was covered in this book was a journey through American loneliness, and it was just really interesting. Like, I found some parts of this book to be a lot more interesting than other parts of it, because some of it just felt like she was like spewing data at you and it was just like not that interesting, but other parts of it where she would really dissect, you know, why we feel those things or why some people experience loneliness. I just thought it was very interesting. I also love the discussion about how during this digital age that we're in, you know, whether we feel more lonely because of the digital age, because we're so easily able to access and see what everyone else is doing, or if the digital age helps us feel less lonely because we're able to connect a lot easier. There was just a lot of really great conversations in this. But I do think though some of this was really boring. Some of the parts felt so unnecessary and they really dragged on with like the info dumping. So I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. Like, it wasn't my favorite nonfiction ever, but it was also really fascinating and it really made me curious about a lot of different things. So I love that. And then the next book that I read was Comfort Me with Apples. I finally read this, and I ended up getting the audiobook checked out from my library for this. This is a horror novella that I've been super intrigued by ever since last year when it was nominated for Goodreads, for the Goodreads Choice Awards. And basically in this book, we're just following this woman named Sophia. She's married to this man, and she lives in this world that's like very perfect. Like, everything in the world is perfect, and they're always asking like, are you happy? Like, you should be happy. Like, aren't you happy? This book, I don't want to give absolutely anything away because it's best if you just go into this book knowing as little as possible, but holy shit, dude, this was a 5-star book. My mind was absolutely fucking blown. Because this book, it's like one of those books where once you realize what's happening, you're like, bitch, what? Like, immediately want to reread, and like, what a freaking concept, okay? Like, this was just so brilliant in the way that it was written, and I don't know, I'm just a huge fan of it. I thought it had a lot of really great commentary on certain things that I'm not going to spoil for you because that would be a spoiler. But yeah, 5-star book, one of my favorite horror novellas that I've ever read. Like, wow, this book slaps, and it's so genuinely like disturbing, and it'll make you angry. Okay, it'll make you so angry, but like in a good way. And then the next book that I read after that was The Comfort Book by Matt Haig. This is another one of his nonfiction books. I've actually read 3 nonfictions by Matt Haig now, and Matt Haig is one of my favorite authors if you didn't know, because, you know, The Humans and The Midnight Library, like, I love a lot of his stuff. But unfortunately, I felt like with this being the 3rd nonfiction book that I've read from him, I'm just kind of very familiar with his writing now with nonfiction, and this one was probably my least favorite nonfiction book from him so far, just because it's starting to feel like it's getting a little bit repetitive with like what he's trying to say in his nonfiction books, and at sometimes it felt a little too like self-help, but like on the nose, to the point where it's like kind of obvious advice and wasn't really very thoughtful at all. And so I don't know, I ended up giving this one like a 3-star. I would definitely recommend his other 2 nonfiction books over this one, especially Reasons to Stay Alive is probably my favorite from him so far. It just wasn't my favorite nonfiction that I read this month, but I'm still glad that I read it because it was in fact very comforting. And then I read The Maid by Nita Prose. Ended up reading this one this month because my friend Savannah over from Riveting Reads, she asked me to co-host for her book club this month, and this was going to be the pick for January, so I will have the live show linked down below where me and Savannah discussed this book in great detail. But this book was very fun, you know? It's like a thriller book. It's kind of more on the like the cozy mystery side of thriller things, and we're following this woman who's a maid. Her name's Molly the maid, and she goes to clean one of the rooms and she finds a dead body in the room, and she's like, what the fuck? This book, if I had to describe it, it would be like Finlay Donovan meets Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine. Like, that is exactly how I would describe this book, because while it does have some of the fun, cozy mystery kind of vibe of Finlay Donovan, I don't think it's as cute or fun as Finlay Donovan. It definitely, like, Molly as a character reminds me a lot more of Eleanor Oliphant from Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. But yeah, it definitely has those vibes. I feel like as a thriller, there were some things about this book that really worked for me, and then some things that didn't so much. I found it kind of frustrating at times how naive our main protagonist Molly could be about certain situations, so that was kind of like the one thing that was kind of holding me back from enjoying this book so much. I don't know, I mean, I thought it was a really good time though overall. It read very quickly, it was like a fun thriller to read, and there was a really good plot twist at the end of this book. Like, this whole entire book, I was probably debating giving this like 3 to 3.5 stars, but then that plot twist at the end was pretty shocking and it made me bump it up to like a 4 star. So the ending was very satisfying, so that is a great thing. And also, I'm so excited because they're already talking about adapting this book, and Florence Pugh is tied to play the lead, so like, oh my god, I'm dead, I love it. And then the next book that I read this month was Ice Planet Barbarians by Ruby Dixon. This was actually a buddy read that I did with my friend Mikay, and we both did our own separate reading vlogs for this book, so I'll link my reading vlog down below as well as his if you'd like to see his. But this is a very unexpected book for me, you know, this is not my usual book that I pick up, because this is a sci-fi romance. Basically, that's essentially about this girl going and some aliens. Yep, yeah. This book, okay, it sounds ridiculous, and it is ridiculous, but it's also just kind of fun, and it's just like some fun escapism. Like, I didn't hate it the way that I thought I would, okay? And in this book, we're following this girl named Georgie who gets abducted by these aliens, and then she gets dropped onto this planet where these giant blue aliens are. There's different kinds of aliens in this book. There's a lot of really interesting things that happen in this book. I don't want to get too much into it because, you know, I made a whole reading vlog about it, so you can see that down below if you want to watch more. But this book was just very fascinating, and there were some things that I really enjoyed about it, and there were some things that I didn't enjoy too much about it. There was just a little bit too much of a plot convenience thing happening towards the end of this book that just kind of made me roll my eyes, and it felt a little bit too cliche. And also, some of the scenes in this book felt very much more like a horror novel as opposed to a romance novel. I was like, what the fuck did I just get myself into? But yeah, I ended up giving this one 3 stars. It was a perfectly fine, enjoyable time, you know? And then the last book that I read this month, you're probably wondering what the 1-star book is. So, prepare yourselves, because it's Every Last Secret by A.R. Torre. Sadness. I thought I would love this book, you know? I paid for this book, like, to own it, and I'm just so upset that I didn't like this. This is once again why I feel like A.R. Torre might not be the author for me, you know, because this is another book of hers that I'm disappointed by. I have given one of her other books 1 star before, and that was The Ghostwriter, so like, I'm seeing a trend here. Unfortunately, I had to give this 1 star because I did not find any like redeemable things about this book. This book is a thriller, and you know, usually I do enjoy the rich people murder vibes, like I really do. Like, you guys know I love the rich people murder vibes, but this book was just so frustrating. And I feel like the thing that annoyed me the most about this book is because the writing, it doesn't even feel like a thriller, it just feels like this over-the-top dramatic story about these 2 freaking girls who are like fighting over this man the whole time. Like, one of them is married to him, and then the other one is working in the office with him, and it's like this cat and mouse game of them both like trying to freaking steal him from the other. It's just so frustrating, and it was so dumb. And I'm sorry, I feel like this is very like a Taryn Fisher vibes kind of thriller, if you know what I'm saying. And Taryn Fisher actually blurbed this. So like, I got receipts, okay? Like, I didn't just say that just to say that. Like, I made that connection when I saw that blurb. I was like, you know what? This does feel like a Taryn Fisher thriller. So maybe if Taryn Fisher is like your jam with thrillers, then maybe you would enjoy this one. But God, this was just, it was painful. The ending was just, it was ridiculous. So yeah, it's a 1 star. It happened. I'm so sorry. Those are all of the books that I read in the month of January. I know, 19 books. We're starting off with quite a bang in 2022. I'm hoping I can keep this energy flowing into February, because I have such a huge February TBR that I'm honestly overwhelmed just thinking about it, because there's only 28 days in February, so I gotta like get it done. But yeah, thank you so much for hanging out. Thank you for watching. Let me know, how many books did you read in the month of January? What was the best book that you read in the month of January? And let me know what you're looking forward to reading in February, because I have so many things that I'm looking forward to reading in February. And once again, if you want to join in on more reading sprints and movie nights with me next month, then maybe you can consider joining my Patreon. The link will be down below, and we already have such a fun community over there, and I'm so appreciative to anybody who's already signed up for my Patreon. You know, I've only been doing it for like a month now, and I've already had so much fucking fun. It's just so much fun, and I really appreciate this little community that we have going on over there. So thank you so much to everybody who's already signed up and who's already been participating in the reading sprints and the movie nights and everything like that. So Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you very soon with another video. Bye!